Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sleepy Shadows. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and fall asleep. If today was long or heavy, I'll do my best to make your night a little more comfortable with these stories. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy calm, quiet horror stories like these, you're welcome to subscribe. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. This happened years ago, but it's one of those memories that never really fades. It doesn't come back every day, and it doesn't haunt me in a dramatic way. But whenever I think about it, the feeling snaps right back into place. Not fear, exactly. More like anger mixed with clarity. The kind of memory that changes how you see situations long after they've passed. It was a house party. The kind that feels chaotic in the moment, but normal in hindsight. Someone's place where parents were gone for the night. Music playing too loud. People coming and going. Drinks everywhere. Laughter spilling into rooms that weren't meant to hold that many people. Nothing about it felt dangerous at the time. Just loud, crowded, and messy. By the end of the night, a bunch of us decided to crash there instead of trying to get home. It wasn't planned. It just sort of happened the way these things always do. One person lies down, then another. Or then suddenly no one wants to leave, and the house turns into a makeshift sleepover. There were about 15 girls in one room, some on the floor, some sharing beds, some curled up wherever there was space. It wasn't comfortable, but it felt safe in that collective way. Too many people around for anything bad to happen. Or so we thought. I ended up on the couch. It wasn't a big couch, but it was elevated, which already felt like a win. Everyone else was on the floor, tangled in blankets and jackets. I remember feeling relieved to have that spot. I stretched out, kicked my shoes off, and fell asleep pretty quickly. I was exhausted. The music eventually stopped. The house quieted down. That heavy post-party silence settled in. The kind where everything smells like alcohol and sweat and stale air. The kind where your body just shuts down. I don't know how long I was asleep before something pulled me out of it. At first, it didn't register as danger. It was just sensation, pressure, touch, something against my feet, my legs. Light at first, almost testing. I remember that half-awake confusion where your brain hasn't fully caught up yet, where you're aware something is happening but haven't assigned meaning to it. I thought maybe someone had shifted in their sleep. Maybe someone rolled over and bumped into the couch. Then it didn't stop. The touch moved. It was deliberate. That's when my body reacted before my brain did. I kicked. Hard. Not a polite nudge, not a warning. A full instinctive kick fueled by irritation and anger. I sat up at the same time, adrenaline flooding in, words already forming before I had fully opened my eyes. I told him this was my spot and to fuck off. Loud. Sharp. Mean. The room stirred. Someone groaned. Someone else shifted. I barely registered any of that because I was focused on him. It was one of my classmates. Someone I recognized. Someone I had seen around school. Someone who, up until that moment, had existed firmly in the category of harmless acquaintance. Not a friend, but not someone I ever would have thought twice about. He scrambled back, muttering something under his breath. He didn't argue, didn't deny it, didn't try to explain. He just moved away, disappearing into the chaos of sleeping bodies on the floor. I lay back down, heart pounding, annoyed more than scared at that point. I told myself it was nothing, just someone drunk and confused, or someone who made a mistake. That explanation was easy. Too easy. The next morning, things felt different. Not immediately. At first, it was the usual aftermath: headaches, dry mouths, groggy laughter about who slept where and who snored, people stretching, checking phones, trying to piece together the night before. Then the conversation started. Quiet at first. Someone mentioned feeling uncomfortable. Another girl said something about being touched. Someone else nodded. Stories began overlapping. Details lining up. It wasn't just me. He had been going around the room, touching feet, legs, bodies, testing boundaries while everyone slept. That realization hit harder than the moment itself. Because it wasn't an accident. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't harmless. It was deliberate. And the only reason it stopped with me was because I woke up mean. That part stuck with me. I wasn't brave. I wasn't heroic. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just pissed off and reactive. I didn't freeze. I didn't second-guess myself. I didn't worry about being polite or causing a scene. I reacted, and that reaction shut it down. Other girls didn't wake up right away. Or they did and didn't react as loudly. Or they froze. Or they tried to rationalize it in the moment the way so many people do when something confusing and violating happens. No one is wrong for that. But realizing how differently the situation could have gone made me angry in a way I hadn't expected. Angry at him. I'm angry at how normalized that kind of behavior is. Angry at the idea that being mean is sometimes the only thing that keeps you safe. We talked about it afterward. Quietly. Not everyone wanted to make a big deal out of it. Some people brushed it off. Some laughed nervously. Some were clearly shaken but didn't want to push it further. He didn't face real consequences. At least, not publicly. And that's another part that sticks with me. How easy it is for this kind of thing to slide by. For how often it gets minimized. How quickly the focus shifts from what someone did to how others reacted to it. I think about that night sometimes when people talk about safety in numbers. About how being in a group doesn't always mean you're protected. Sometimes it just means you assume someone else is watching. I also think about how instinctive my reaction was. How my body didn't wait for permission. How it didn't check for social rules or politeness or fear of embarrassment. It just reacted. And I'm grateful for that. Not because I did anything special, but because it showed me something important. That being loud, being rude, being mean. Those things are not character flaws when they're protecting you. They're survival tools. I wish none of us had needed them that night. I wish he had never done what he did. I wish every girl there had woken up safe and undisturbed. But the reality is, situations like that happen far more often than people like to admit. And they don't always look like dark alleys or strangers. Sometimes they look like classmates, parties, couches, rooms full of people who assume nothing bad could happen because nothing bad is supposed to. What stays with me isn't fear. It's awareness. The knowledge that listening to your instincts matters. That reacting loudly matters. That you don't owe anyone politeness when your boundaries are being crossed. And yeah, thank God I'm mean when I get woken up. This happened when I was in high school, at an age where you think bad things only happen far away, to people you don't know, in stories you hear on the news, not to someone you recognize in the hallway, not to someone who laughed with you, shared classes with you, stood at the same lockers and complained about the same teachers. He was a friend of mine. Not my closest friend, but close enough that his death didn't feel distant or abstract. Close enough that when I think about high school, boy, his face still comes to mind naturally, like he's supposed to be there. It was a normal weekend night. There had been a party, the kind that happens constantly at that age. Loud music, too much alcohol, People who shouldn't be drinking anyway. He drank too much. That part is clear. He was intoxicated, far beyond what he should have been. But he wasn't doing anything violent or reckless. He wasn't driving. He was walking home. That's the part that still feels important. He was walking. It was late, and his neighborhood was quiet. Not near a highway, not near a bar district. Deep inside a residential area where people knew each other, where families lived, where cars drove slowly because there were kids and pets and streetlights spaced far apart. Somewhere on that walk, someone hit him with their car. At first, people assumed it was an accident, that someone must have been speeding, panicked, and driven off. That's how these stories usually go. But the autopsy told a very different story. The injuries showed that the car wasn't moving fast. Not fast at all. The medical examiner said the damage was consistent with a vehicle traveling under 10 miles per hour. Slow enough that the driver would have felt it. Slow enough that there was no way they didn't know they had hit a person. Even worse, the autopsy showed that he had been run over twice. Not once. Twice. Both times slowly. That detail changes everything. Or this wasn't a momentary mistake. This wasn't someone losing control of their car for a second. This wasn't a hit and run caused by panic alone. This was someone driving over a human body, slowly, then doing it again. It didn't kill him instantly. That's another part that's hard to sit with. He survived the initial impact. He was alive afterward. Somehow, despite his injuries, he managed to crawl to the side of the road. That alone tells you how much pain he must have been in, and how strong the instinct to survive is, even when the body is breaking down. The medical opinion was that he likely lived for hours, in the dark. In pain most of us can't even imagine, alone, injured beyond help, waiting for something that never came. By the time he was found, it was too late. The shock of it hit the school like a wave. One day he was there. The next, he wasn't. Lockers stood untouched. Desks stayed empty. Teachers struggled to find the right words. Or students cried in hallways, in bathrooms, in cars after school. But the grief was mixed with something else. Confusion, anger, fear. Because the police didn't have a suspect, not even one. There were no witnesses, no security cameras, no clear tire marks that led anywhere. No vehicle reported damaged in a way that raised suspicion. No neighbor came forward saying they heard or saw something unusual. The case went cold almost immediately. That's what makes it even worse. Or this didn't happen on a highway where someone passing through could disappear into the night. It happened deep inside his neighborhood. Streets people drove every day. Streets where neighbors recognized each other's cars. Streets where someone had to live nearby. Which means whoever did this probably went home afterward. They parked their car, they went inside, they washed their hands, they slept in their bed, and they may still live there. That thought never leaves you once it takes hold. Every time someone drove through that area afterward, people wondered. Every unfamiliar car looked suspicious. Every familiar one, too. Because the truth is, the person responsible could have been anyone. A neighbor, a parent, someone who waved at you while walking their dog, someone who never got caught. As time passed, the case faded from the news, but it never faded from memory. It became one of those stories people bring up quietly, years later, with disbelief still in their voices. The kind of story that doesn't feel real no matter how many times you hear it. What stays with me the most isn't just the brutality of what happened. It's the slowness of it, the intention implied by that speed, the choice to keep going, the choice to do it again, the choice to leave someone alive and suffering, and then to disappear without consequence. There was no justice, no arrest, no trial, no closure, just a family left with questions that will never be answered, and a community that learned something dark about itself. that sometimes evil doesn't come from far away. Sometimes it lives right next door. And sometimes it never gets exposed. Years later, when people talk about it, there's always the same sentence that comes up. They never even had a suspect. It's said with disbelief, like repeating it might make it less true. But it is true. Not one. And that's what makes the story linger. Because it forces you to accept something deeply uncomfortable. That there are acts so cruel, so deliberate, that they happen quietly, in familiar places, and then vanish into normal life without leaving fingerprints behind. He didn't deserve any of it. He was young, he was walking home, and someone decided his life could end that way. Whenever I think about him now, I don't just think about the night he died. I think about all the ordinary moments before that. The way he talked, the way he laughed, the future he assumed he had, all like everyone else at that age. And then I think about the unanswered questions. Who was driving? Why didn't they stop? How do you live with that? And how many people pass them every day without knowing what they did? There are stories that scare you. There are stories that make you angry. And then there are stories like this that sit quietly in your chest and never really leave, because there's no ending to them, just a life cut short, and a truth that never came out. One of the things that makes this case so hard to sit with, even all these years later, is that there was never a reason. No argument, no fight, no bad blood that anyone could point to. Nothing that could be traced back to that party or to anything he had done that night. When people talk about violent deaths, especially involving young people, there's usually some kind of explanation offered. A trigger, a build-up, a chain of events that once laid out, it makes the outcome horrifying, but at least understandable. This wasn't like that. There was no altercation at the party. No one remembers him arguing with anyone. No one remembers him leaving angry or upset. He wasn't targeted during the night, wasn't threatened, wasn't involved in anything shady or aggressive. He was drunk, yes, but not belligerent, not confrontational. Just a teenager who drank too much and decided to walk home instead of calling someone. That's it. That's the entire setup. Or when the police started investigating, they did what investigators always do when a crime doesn't immediately make sense. They looked for hidden motives. They assumed there must be something more, something people didn't know about. Some kind of secret life or risky behavior that could explain why someone would do something so deliberate and cruel. Their first working theory was that he might have been involved in something criminal. Maybe a drug deal gone wrong. Maybe he owed money. And maybe he crossed the wrong people. That kind of explanation, while awful, would at least give the crime a shape, a logic. But there was no evidence. They dug into his life, his friendships, his family, his finances, his phone records, his school life. They talked to everyone who knew him. Teachers, friends, neighbors. No one had anything even remotely suspicious to share. He wasn't involved with criminals. He wasn't in debt. He wasn't hiding anything. He was just a kid. A drunk kid walking home in his own neighborhood. When that theory collapsed, there was nothing solid to replace it. No suspect emerged. No pattern fit. No prior incidents in the area lined up in a way that made sense. The lack of speed involved in the crime ruled out panic or loss of control. The fact that he was run over twice ruled out accident entirely. This was intentional, but intention without motive is one of the hardest things for law enforcement to deal with, where you can't profile randomness easily. The cops didn't like saying it out loud, but eventually it became clear they had no decent working theory. Every idea they floated fell apart under scrutiny. There was no evidence pointing in any direction strongly enough to follow. And that's when the most disturbing possibility started to settle in. that it might have been random. That someone, somewhere nearby, saw a drunk teenager stumbling down a dark residential street and decided to act. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, not out of necessity, but because they could. That idea is deeply uncomfortable because it removes all the usual safety nets people rely on to feel secure. We tell ourselves that bad things happen for reasons, that if we avoid certain behaviors or situations, we'll be okay. That danger is predictable if you know what to look for. Randomness destroys that illusion. If this was random, then there was nothing he could have done differently, short of not existing in that moment. If it was random, then anyone could have been in his place. Anyone walking home, anyone vulnerable, anyone unlucky enough to cross paths with the wrong person at the wrong time. The way the car moved slowly over him suggests deliberation, not impulse. That's what chills people the most. Whoever did this didn't just lash out and flee. They stayed. They felt what was happening. They chose to do it again. And then they left him there. And they were never identified. That means the person responsible didn't panic afterward in a way that drew attention. They didn't crash. They didn't seek help. They didn't confess. They didn't show visible signs of distress that made someone suspicious. They blended back into normal life, seamlessly enough to avoid detection entirely. That's terrifying in a quiet way, because it suggests a level of control, or at least comfort, with what they had done. The fact that this happened deep inside his neighborhood only sharpens that fear. This wasn't a stranger passing through from a highway or an unfamiliar area. This was someone who knew those streets, someone who knew the layout, someone who knew they could disappear back into a house nearby, someone who may still live there. That thought never really goes away for the people who knew him. Even now, years later, when people drive through that area, there's a lingering unease. A sense that the story never finished. That there's a missing chapter no one ever got to read. There was no justice, no explanation, no motive, just a brutal act that happened once and then vanished into silence. And maybe that's the hardest part. Not the violence itself, but the lack of meaning attached to it. The idea that someone could do something so cruel for no reason anyone can identify, and then continue on with their life as if nothing happened. But the police eventually stopped actively investigating. There were no leads left to follow. No new evidence. No witnesses coming forward. The case didn't close officially, but it went dormant, filed away under unsolved. For those who knew him, though, it never really closed. Because when something like this happens without reason, it leaves a different kind of wound. One that doesn't heal through understanding or accountability. One that just exists. The best explanation anyone has been able to come up with isn't satisfying, but it's the only one that fits the evidence. That it was random. That someone saw an opportunity. And that was enough. That realization changes how you see the world. It makes familiar streets feel less safe. It makes you question assumptions about neighbors, about communities, about the idea that danger comes from outside rather than within. He didn't provoke it. He didn't cause it. He didn't deserve it. He was just walking home, and someone decided that was enough. My grandparents were Dutch immigrants who had settled in New Zealand long before I was born. By the 1970s, they were well established there, raising a family and trying to build a sense of home in a country that was still very different from the one they had left behind. They worked hard, saved what they could, and like many families at the time, they found joy in simple things. One of those simple joys was camping. They owned a caravan, nothing fancy, just practical and sturdy. To them, It represented freedom, a way to pack up the kids, leave the routines behind for a few days, and see parts of the country that still felt wild and untouched. My mom and her siblings were all young at the time, 10 or under, and those trips were meant to be adventures. Lakes, trees, fresh air, long days outside followed by quiet nights. On this particular trip, they decided to go somewhere very rural, deep in the North Island. It wasn't a campground with facilities and other families nearby. It was more of an informal spot near a lake, surrounded by dense rainforest. The kind of place people went because it was beautiful and remote, not because it was safe or convenient. They were completely surrounded by bush. During the day, it was peaceful. The lake was calm. The trees towered overhead. Birds called from every direction. The kids ran around, explored, got tired in that good, honest way children do when they've been outside all day. Everything about it felt right. Isolated, yes, but not threatening. When night came, they settled into the caravan. The children fell asleep quickly, exhausted. My grandparents stayed awake a little longer. They were sitting quietly, reading, maybe talking softly, having a cup of tea. Nothing unusual, just the normal end to a long day. That's when the sounds started. At first they were subtle, easy to dismiss, a snap of a twig somewhere nearby, the soft crunch of something moving through undergrowth. In a rainforest at night, those kinds of noises are common. Animals move, branches fall. The forest never truly goes silent. They told themselves that. But the noises didn't stop. They became more distinct, more deliberate. Footsteps, not fast, not frantic, but careful, slow, close enough that it felt wrong. Once or twice they thought they heard what might have been a hushed voice, low and indistinct. Not clear enough to understand, but enough to make them look at each other in silence. They didn't say much at first. No one wants to be the one to admit they're scared, especially when you're responsible for children. They told themselves they were being paranoid. That isolation was playing tricks on their minds. Still, the feeling in the caravan changed. The sense of safety drained away quietly, replaced by tension. My grandmother grew uneasy. My grandfather tried to stay calm, but later he admitted that something felt deeply wrong. Not like an animal outside, not like random forest noise, like people. Eventually, my grandmother lay down, trying to sleep. My grandfather stayed awake. He said he couldn't relax. Every small sound made him tense. He lay there listening, heart beating louder than it should have. Then he heard it clearly. A definite footstep. Right outside the caravan door. Not in the distance, not off to the side. Directly outside. He held his breath and listened. The night was pitch black. There was no moon, no ambient light, and the darkness outside the small caravan windows was absolute, like staring into a wall. Slowly, carefully, he leaned toward the window and peeked out. At first, he saw nothing. Then he noticed a small glow. A cigarette. The glowing tip hovered at about head height, right near the caravan door. Whoever was holding it was standing very still, tall enough that the cigarette wasn't low to the ground, tall enough to be an adult man. My grandfather could still hear other footsteps, too, a movement around the caravan. More than one person. Even though the man with the cigarette wasn't moving, others clearly were. That was the moment he later described as the most fear he had ever felt in his life. This wasn't imagination anymore. This wasn't an animal. There were people outside, people close enough to touch the door. He had his wife and 4 small children asleep inside that caravan. There was nowhere to run, no help nearby, and no lights to switch on that would magically make it safe. Just him, his family, and whatever was happening outside. He told me later that his body felt cold. that his thoughts raced but also narrowed down to one thing. He had to do something. In the caravan, he had a butcher's knife. He was a butcher by trade, and for reasons he never fully explained, he had brought the knife with him on the trip. Maybe habit, maybe practicality. Maybe it had just ended up there without much thought, but that knife became the only thing he felt he had. He stood up quietly, careful not to wake the children. His heart was pounding so hard he was afraid it would be heard outside. He gripped the knife tightly, his hands steady despite the fear. He told himself that if he opened the door and yelled, if he showed himself, maybe it would scare them away. Maybe they were just trying to see if anyone was there. Maybe confidence was enough. He took a breath and opened the caravan door. And the night outside was empty. No people, no footsteps, no movement, just darkness and silence. For a moment, he genuinely thought he had lost his mind. Then he looked down. On the ground, right outside the door, was a cigarette butt. Fresh, recently finished, still faintly warm. There was no doubt anymore. Someone had been there. He didn't wait. He didn't investigate further. He didn't call out. He didn't try to understand who or why. He closed the door, woke my grandmother, and told her to get the kids up immediately. He was already moving, already preparing to leave. Luckily, he had planned to start driving early the next morning anyway. So much of their gear was ready. Within minutes, everyone was awake, confused, scared, but moving. He got them into the car, hooked up the caravan, and drove. They didn't stop until they reached an area closer to a town. Somewhere with lights, somewhere with other people. Somewhere that felt anchored to civilization again, when they never went back to that spot. When my grandfather told me this story years later, he didn't embellish it. He didn't dramatize it. He told it plainly, but his voice changed when he described the cigarette glowing in the darkness. That detail stayed with him more than anything else. Not the footsteps, not the fear, the certainty. The knowledge that someone had been standing there, silently, watching a caravan full of sleeping children in the middle of nowhere. They never found out who it was. They never learned why they were there. Maybe it was opportunistic. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something far worse that never got the chance to happen because my grandfather acted when he did. That uncertainty is what makes the story linger. Because nothing supernatural happened. There was no monster, no ghost, just people in the dark, far from help. And sometimes that's far more terrifying. To this day, my family treats that story as a reminder, not just about fear, but about instinct, about the way your body recognizes danger before your mind wants to accept it, about how sometimes leaving without answers is the safest choice you can make. My grandparents never camped that remotely again, and honestly, after hearing that story, I don't blame them at all. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. I used to work at Big Bend National Park, and if you've never been there, it's hard to explain just how empty it feels. Not empty in a boring way. Empty in a way that makes you realize how small you are. The land stretches out forever, mountains stacked against the horizon, canyons carved deep and dry, and silence that feels heavy instead of peaceful. During the day, it's beautiful. At night, it's something else entirely. I was living in Panther Junction at the time, or that alone should tell you something. The names out there aren't subtle. There's a wash behind the area, kind of a canyon that cuts through the land, and it's called Panther Canyon. It's not poetic, it's literal. We knew there were mountain lions living out there. Not rumors, not stories. Actual confirmed animals. We had seen one a few times from a distance, and the rangers talked about at least a pair living in that area. For context, mountain lions, panthers, cougars, whatever you want to call them, are not like bears. They don't blunder around. They don't make a lot of noise. They don't announce themselves. They are quiet, patient, and very, very good at not being seen. Most people who encounter one never realize it was there until much later, if they realize it at all. Knowing all this, for some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to go looking for one at night. I had bought a pair of night vision goggles. Not cheap toy ones, but real NVGs. I was excited about them in the way you get excited about new gear, especially when you live and work somewhere wild. I told myself it was for observation, for curiosity, for seeing animals in their natural environment. In reality, it was a mix of boredom, confidence, and not fully respecting what I was dealing with. A buddy of mine was supposed to come with me. That was the plan. 2 people. Safety in numbers. Someone to watch your back. Someone to confirm what you're seeing. But he got too drunk that night. Not just tipsy, but done. Out of the question. I should have taken that as a sign and stayed in. Instead, I went alone. That was the mistake. I headed out after dark, NVGs on, walking toward Panther Canyon. The goggles worked incredibly well. The desert at night through night vision looks unreal. Everything glows in shades of green. Rocks, bushes, the ground itself. Depth perception changes. Distance feels strange. Your brain has to constantly recalibrate. At first, it was almost fun. I could see way better than I should have been able to. I could spot small animals moving in the brush. Rabbits, maybe a fox. The goggles made me feel capable, like technology had leveled the playing field between me and whatever else was out there. That confidence didn't last long. As I moved deeper toward the canyon, the environment changed. The wash dipped down, the walls closing in a bit. The brush grew thicker in places. Shadows became deeper, even through the night vision. Sound behaved differently too. Footsteps echoed oddly. Little noises bounced around. And that's when it hit me. Panthers are nocturnal. I knew that intellectually. I had always known that. But knowing something and feeling it are very different. It suddenly occurred to me that while I was creeping toward what I believed was a den, the animal I was hoping to see was already awake, already active, already operating at full capacity. And unlike me, it didn't need goggles. It could hear me. Every step, every shift of weight, the crunch of gravel, the brush brushing against my legs. It could smell me too. Sweat, human scent, oil, everything. I realized very suddenly that I wasn't sneaking up on anything. I was announcing myself. I slowed down, trying to be quieter, but that only made things worse. When you move slowly, you become deliberate. Every sound becomes intentional. I could hear my own breathing in my ears. I could hear my boots against the ground no matter how careful I was. The silence around me felt wrong. Not empty. Focused. I reached what I thought was a safe distance from where the den area was supposed to be. I stopped and scanned the area with the goggles. I was looking at the ground, the rocks, the shadows between bushes, trying to spot movement. I kept thinking, where is it? Where's the cat? That question should have scared me more than it did, twice, because the answer wasn't that it wasn't there. The answer was that I couldn't see it. Dead silence. No birds, no insects, no small animal movement. That alone is a bad sign in the wild. Nature doesn't go quiet for no reason. It goes quiet when something is wrong. I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched. Not paranoia, not imagination. That deep, primal awareness that something with intent is paying attention to you. The kind of feeling that makes your skin feel tight and your stomach drop. I stood there, frozen, scanning the area, trying to convince myself I was overreacting, trying to laugh it off in my head, trying to be the confident guy with the cool gear. Then I heard rustling. Not loud, not crashing, just brush moving, close enough that it wasn't wind. That was it. Every rational thought disappeared. Every bit of bravado evaporated instantly. I didn't wait to confirm anything. I didn't try to locate the sound. I didn't try to observe. I turned around and ran, not a tactical retreat, not a careful withdrawal. I hightailed it back the way I came, adrenaline dumping into my system so hard my legs felt light and heavy at the same time. I didn't care about noise anymore. I didn't care about stealth. I just wanted distance. The whole way back, my brain kept screaming the same thought over and over. If it wanted you, you'd already be dead. Gosh, that's the worst part about mountain lions. You don't get a warning. You don't get a chase. You don't hear them coming. If one decides to attack, it's already on you before you know it exists. I made it back to my trailer and slammed the door behind me, locking it immediately, even though a lock wouldn't do much against a determined animal. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I stood there for a while, just listening, waiting for my breathing to slow down. Nothing followed me. Nothing scratched at the door. Nothing made itself known, which somehow made it worse, because it meant I had been allowed to leave. I sat down, took the goggles off, and just stared at them for a while. They were still cool, still impressive, still did exactly what they were supposed to do, but they didn't make me safer. They didn't put me in control. They just let me see the darkness better. That night taught me something important. Technology doesn't replace experience. Gear doesn't replace respect. And curiosity can get you killed if you forget where you are in the food chain. I laugh about it now. I tell the story and joke about being way out of my element, about how dumb it was, about how the goggles were sweet but the situation was not. But underneath that humor is real fear, because I know how close I came to something going very wrong. I walked up on a known panther den, alone at night, in complete darkness, thinking I was the observer. In reality, I was the one being observed the entire time, and that realization still sends a chill through me every time I think about it. Back in the day, before life got complicated and responsibilities started piling up, my buddies and I had a habit of driving around aimlessly just for the hell of it. We lived in an area surrounded by mountains and forests, and when you're young, bored, and have access to a Jeep, back roads start to feel like invitations instead of warnings. We weren't looking for trouble. We weren't thrill seekers in the dramatic sense. It was just something to do. Load up, drive slow, take random turns, see where the road went. Sometimes you'd find a good view, sometimes an old abandoned structure, sometimes nothing at all. The emptiness was part of the appeal. There was one Forest Service road we all knew about. We'd passed it countless times. It branched off the main mountain road we were familiar with, but it was always gated shut. Heavy-set metal gate, locked with signs warning people to stay out. Because of that, it became one of those things you stop noticing after a while. Just part of the scenery. Then one day, it wasn't gated anymore. No lock, no chain, just wide open. That alone should have made us pause longer than it did. But curiosity has a way of overriding caution, especially when you're young and with friends. We joked about it. Wondered aloud why it was open, assumed maybe maintenance had been done, or the Forest Service just hadn't bothered to close it back up yet. So we turned in. The road was a rough 2-track, nothing maintained, but just dirt and rock with grass growing down the middle. It immediately felt different from the main road. narrower, more enclosed. Trees pressed closer on both sides, blocking out most of the sky. The further we drove, the quieter it got. No other tire tracks, no signs of recent traffic. We kept going anyway. Mile after mile passed, the Jeep bouncing along, suspension working overtime. At some point we realized we had gone a lot farther than we thought. About 10 miles in, the road began to dip downward into a hollow. The trees thickened, the light dimmed even more, and the air felt heavier. Then the road just ended. Not a turnaround, not a clearing, just a dead end in this bowl-shaped hollow surrounded by trees and steep slopes. It felt like a place people weren't meant to be unless they had a reason. We parked and got out. The first thing that hit me was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. No birds, no wind, no distant sounds from the mountain road we'd left behind. It felt like sound itself was being absorbed by the trees. We laughed it off at first, like you do, made jokes, said we'd driven to the middle of nowhere just to take a piss. We split up, each of us wandering a bit around the bottom of the hollow, shining our eyes over the ground, the trees, the rocks. That's when I saw the fire ring. At first glance, it looked old, just a circle of stones, blackened in the middle. Something you'd expect to find out there. People camp in weird places all the time. But when I got closer, something felt off. The ashes were wet. Not damp from dew or rain that happened days ago. Wet in a way that suggested water had been poured on them recently. The kind of wet that happens when someone puts a fire out fast. Like they didn't want it burning anymore. Like they needed it gone now. That alone made my stomach tighten. Then I saw the cigarette. It wasn't tossed on the ground or crushed into the dirt. There was a stick jammed upright into the soil, and balanced on top of it was a cigarette, still lit. Smoke curling upward in thin, lazy lines. No breeze, no person, no vehicle. Just a burning cigarette in a hollow that felt like it was holding its breath. That's the moment when your brain catches up to what your instincts already know. Someone was there. Not earlier. Not hours ago. Right then. And whoever it was had heard us coming. And the fire hadn't been put out carefully. It had been snuffed in a hurry. The cigarette wasn't abandoned. It was placed. Like someone stepped away from it for a second. Or set it there so they could see it burn without holding it. I stopped moving. Every sense went into overdrive. My ears strained for sound. My eyes scanned the tree line. My body felt hot and cold at the same time. I didn't call out. I didn't whistle. I didn't try to be brave. I reached for my pistol. I didn't draw it immediately, but I made sure my hand was on it. That small action alone changed how real the situation felt. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was self-preservation. I turned and walked back toward the Jeep. Not slowly, not running, just fast enough to put distance between me and that fire ring. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see movement in the trees because I wasn't sure how I'd react if I did. When I got back, my buddies were already there. They weren't joking anymore, but they were standing next to the Jeep, guns out, eyes wide, faces tight with that same expression I'm sure was on mine. We didn't need to say much. One of them said something along the lines of, "We need to get the hell out of here, now." No one argued. We piled into the Jeep and left. Fast. Not reckless, but fast enough that the engine roared louder than it had the whole trip in. We didn't stop until we were back on the main mountain road, surrounded by familiar terrain, familiar sounds, and the illusion of safety that comes with being around places you recognize. Only then did we start talking. Each of us had noticed something. Movement that didn't quite register. Sounds that didn't match the environment. That heavy feeling that comes when you realize you're not alone, even though you can't see anyone. We all came to the same conclusion independently. Someone had been hiding in that hollow. Why, we didn't know. Maybe it was nothing criminal. Maybe it was someone living off-grid who didn't want to be found. Maybe it was someone doing something illegal who panicked when they heard engines coming down a road that was usually gated. Or maybe it was something worse. What stuck with me was the cigarette, the confidence of it, the casualness, the fact that whoever it was didn't immediately flee. They didn't crush it and run. They put it somewhere and stepped away. That suggests they weren't scared of us. They were watching. Not long after that incident, a hiker went missing in that general area. The details were vague, but the circumstances were suspicious. Search efforts turned up nothing. No clear explanation. No resolution. I can't prove it was connected, but I can't shake the feeling that it was. When you spend enough time in remote places, you learn something important. The scariest things aren't animals. They aren't ghosts. They aren't the dark. They're people. People who know the land. People who choose isolation. People who don't want to be seen. That hollow felt like a place someone had claimed. And we wandered into it without permission. We were lucky. We left with nothing more than a story, and a shared understanding that some roads are gated for a reason. And when they're suddenly open, it's worth asking why before driving 10 miles into a place where someone else is already watching you arrive. I still think about that cigarette sometimes, burning quietly in the dark. I was 16 years old, barely old enough to drive on my own. I had just gotten my license, and with it came that strange mix of freedom and fear. I felt grown up in small ways, like being able to leave the house without asking permission. But I was still very much a kid. I didn't know much about the world yet. I didn't understand how dark it could be. I thought bad things only happened in movies, or to people far away from my quiet teenage life. There was a girl I was close with at school, which we weren't dating, and we never would. She was one of those girls everyone noticed. Pretty, popular, always surrounded by attention. Most people thought of her as boy crazy, but that wasn't really fair. She was just young and wanted to feel wanted. She liked jocks, confident guys, the kind of people who seemed untouchable to someone like me. I was the opposite. Nerdy, awkward, invisible to most people. I knew she wasn't interested in me romantically, and I accepted that. It still hurts sometimes, but I valued her friendship too much to let jealousy ruin it. She trusted me. That mattered. She talked to me in ways she didn't talk to others. She told me about her relationships, about how intense they could get, about how jealous the guys she dated were, how controlling, how they wanted to know where she was, who she was talking to, what she was doing at all times. She would send me long messages late at night, pouring everything out, then delete them later. She said it was safer that way. She didn't want anyone finding them. Even then, something about that didn't sit right with me, but I didn't have the words for it. I didn't know how to name what I was seeing. I just listened. That's what I knew how to do. One winter night, long after everyone in my house had gone to sleep, my phone rang. That alone was strange. Nobody called that late, especially not on a school night, especially not her. I remember sitting up in bed, heart already beating faster before I even answered, because something about it felt wrong. When I picked up, her voice was barely above a whisper. She was shaking. She asked me to come get her. There was no small talk, no explanation, just urgency. Fear wrapped tightly around every word. I asked her what was wrong, where she was, if she was okay. She cut me off gently but firmly and gave me an address. Her boyfriend's house, in another city. Then she hung up. This was before smartphones, before GPS. I barely knew how to get to school without thinking about it. I had never driven that far alone, especially not at night. My hands were already sweating as I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone. She texted once more. She asked me to bring clothes, a shirt, underwear, sweatpants. That's when the fear really settled in. I didn't think, I just moved. I got out of bed quietly, grabbed whatever clothes I could find that might fit her, and printed directions from MapQuest, but the printer sounded painfully loud in the silent house. Every noise felt like it could wake my parents. I pushed my car out of the driveway instead of starting it. I coasted down the street in the cold, heart pounding, until I was far enough away that I felt safe turning the engine on. My hands shook on the steering wheel the entire drive. The roads were empty. Streetlights blurred past. The winter air felt sharp and unreal. I kept rehearsing what I would say, what I would do. I didn't know what I was driving toward, only that she needed me. When I reached the house, everything felt wrong. It was quiet. Too quiet. No lights on, no cars moving. Just a dark house sitting there like it was holding a secret. She came out quickly, trying to make as little noise as possible. She wasn't wearing any clothes. Her makeup was smeared down her face from crying. Her hair was tangled and flat, like she hadn't slept at all. She looked smaller somehow, fragile, like someone who had been dropped somewhere and didn't know how to get back to herself. She got into the car without saying a word. I started driving immediately. She pulled the clothes on with shaking hands. I didn't look at her. I stared straight ahead, gripping the wheel like it was the only solid thing left in the world. My chest felt tight. I wanted to ask questions, but I was terrified of the answers. Eventually, I asked what happened. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. She swallowed hard, wiped her face, and tried again. She said she had gone to her boyfriend's birthday party. She said she didn't remember much after arriving. She said she woke up like that, in the middle of the room, surrounded by him and his friends, all of them naked. That was all she could say before she started crying again, quietly, like she didn't want the world to hear her. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have the language for it. I didn't know what consent really meant yet, well, not in the way I do now. I didn't understand trauma. I just knew that something horrible had happened to someone I cared about, and I was powerless to fix it. I drove her home. She didn't want to tell her parents. She didn't want anyone to know. She asked me not to say anything. I agreed, because at 16, I thought that was the right thing to do. I thought protecting her meant keeping her secret. I dropped her off quietly. She thanked me, barely meeting my eyes, and disappeared into her house. I drove home in silence. I snuck back into my room just a couple of hours before I had to get up for school. I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head, feeling sick and angry and helpless all at once. We never talked about it again. Not once. At school, things went back to normal on the surface. She smiled, she laughed, she dated other people. Life moved on the way it always does when you're young, fast, and careless. At the time, I didn't fully understand what I had witnessed. I didn't grasp the weight of it. I filed it away as something terrible and confusing, something I didn't know how to process. Years passed. 17 years passed. I grew up. I got married. I had kids of my own. I have a daughter now. She is the light of my world. And something about becoming a parent rewired my brain in ways I never expected. Memories resurface differently. Old moments gain new meaning. Things you once shrugged off suddenly feel unbearable. I cannot tell this story now without crying. because now I understand. Now I understand how vulnerable she was, how young, how scared, how trapped in a situation she didn't choose and couldn't control. I understand how the adults around her failed her, how the boys involved faced no consequences, how easy it is for something like that to be buried and forgotten by everyone except the person it happened to. And I think about how she trusted me enough to call me in the middle of the night, how she knew, instinctively, that I was safe, that I wouldn't hurt her, that I would come. That trust humbles me. She's married now, has been for years, she has kids. From the outside, her life looks good, stable, happy. I don't talk to her anymore. We drifted apart the way people do. But every once in a while, I check her Facebook. I look at the pictures, her smile, her family, and I hope she's okay. I hope she found peace. I hope that night doesn't visit her the way it visits me sometimes. Uninvited, heavy, impossible to ignore. I don't know if she ever told anyone else. I don't know if she ever named what happened. I don't know if she ever got help. I just know that I was there for one small moment in her life when she needed someone. And that moment has stayed with me longer than anything else from my teenage years. There are things you witness when you're young that don't make sense until much later. This was one of them. And it changed me in ways I didn't understand until I held my own child and realized just how fragile innocence really is. Some memories don't fade. They wait. And they teach you, slowly, painfully, what the world really is. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.